You think firewood is simple. You cut a tree, split the wood, let it dry, burn it, done. That's it. Wrong. There are things happening in that woodpile that you have never heard of. Weird things, surprising things. Some of these facts will save you money, some will save you time, and at least one of them is going to make you feel like you've been doing this whole thing slightly wrong for years. Let's start with the ones hiding right in your woodpile. First thing most people get wrong, dry wood is not always light. Sounds backwards, right? Most folks pick up a log, feel the weight, and think they have their answer. Heavy means wet, light means dry. Simple thinking, but wood does not play by simple rules. Here is the deal. Certain hardwoods like oak stay dense even after they are properly seasoned. They can feel solid and heavy in your hands, yet burn beautifully. At the same time, softwoods can trick you. They feel light, almost too light, and still carry moisture inside. I once had a neighbor who swore his birch was ready because it felt light. He loaded his stove with confidence. 5 minutes later, it was smoking like an old diesel truck on a cold morning. He just stood there, staring at it like it betrayed him. The real test is sound. 2 dry logs hit together with a sharp, hollow clack. Wet wood gives a dull thud that feels wrong immediately. Once you hear it, you stop guessing. But this is only the beginning of how wood fools people. Firewood does not actually burn. Yes, that sounds wrong at first, but stay with me. What you see in a fire is not the wood itself burning. It is the gases released from the wood. When heat hits a log, it starts breaking down inside. This process pushes out invisible gases. Those gases mix with air, catch fire, and create the flames you see. The wood itself is more like a fuel generator than the fuel. It feeds the fire by releasing more gas as it heats up. That is why a good fire looks alive. It is constantly producing and burning those gases in waves. You may have noticed flames floating above the log instead of hugging it. That is not a trick of the eye. That is where the gases are burning. It also explains why some fires feel weak and smoky while others burn strong and clean. The difference is how well those gases ignite and burn. And once you understand that, your whole approach to building a fire starts to change. Smaller logs often burn hotter than big ones. Most people think bigger logs mean bigger heat. That sounds logical, but fire does not always follow logic. Smaller pieces of wood have more exposed surface. More surface means the wood heats up faster and releases gases quicker. That creates a stronger and hotter flame. You've probably seen this without realizing it. A handful of kindling can suddenly flare up and feel hotter than a thick log that just sits there. That is because the big log takes time to wake up. It needs to heat through before it really starts producing those burnable gases. I learned this one evening when I was in a hurry and threw in 2 large logs, expecting a strong fire. What I got was a slow, lazy burn that barely pushed any heat. Meanwhile, a few small pieces earlier had heated the room faster. The trick is balance. Small pieces for heat, larger ones for duration. And before we go further, if you like practical tips like this, subscribe to the channel. It helps keep this kind of knowledge alive. But this next part is where most fires really fail. Airflow matters more than the wood itself. You can have perfect firewood, perfectly dry, perfectly cut, and still end up with a disappointing fire. The missing piece is almost always air. Fire needs oxygen just as much as it needs fuel. Without it, the whole process slows down and struggles. Stack your logs too tightly and you choke the fire. There is not enough space for air to move, so the flames weaken and the wood smolders instead of burning clean. On the other hand, if everything is too spread out, heat escapes too quickly and the fire never builds strength. There is a sweet spot where air can move freely, but heat stays concentrated. That is where a fire becomes efficient. It burns hotter, cleaner, and uses less wood. I once packed my stove full thinking I was being smart. It looked impressive, but it burned worse than a half load. That was the day I realized fire cares more about breathing than quantity, and this idea does not stop at the stove door. How you stack wood outside changes how it dries. Most people think once the wood is cut, the job is done. Just pile it somewhere and wait. That mindset alone can cost you months of drying time. The way you stack your firewood matters more than people expect. Flat stacks pushed tight against a wall tend to dry slowly. Air cannot move properly around the wood, and moisture gets trapped. It might look neat, but neat does not mean effective. On the other hand, stacks raised off the ground with space underneath and between rows dry much faster. Air flows through the pile and carries moisture away steadily. And here is the part that surprises most people. Wood needs wind more than sun. Sun helps a little, but moving air does the real work. Wind pulls moisture out quietly and consistently. That is why a shaded but breezy spot often beats a sunny corner with no airflow. It feels wrong at first, but once you see the difference, you stop chasing sunlight. And then there is bark, which behaves in a way most people do not expect. Bark can either help or hurt drying. Most people never even think about bark. It is just there, part of the log, nothing special. But the way you position it can completely change how your wood seasons. If bark is facing up, it acts like a roof. Rain hits it and stays there. Moisture gets trapped underneath and takes longer to escape. Your wood ends up holding onto water like it is not ready to let go. Flip that same log so the bark faces down, and now things change. The bark shields the wood from direct rain, but the exposed side can breathe. Moisture escapes more freely and drying speeds up. Same log, same conditions, completely different result. I used to stack everything bark up because it looked clean and organized. Turns out I was basically putting a waterproof jacket on every piece of firewood. Not exactly a smart move. Once you notice this, you start stacking with purpose instead of habit. But even if you get this right, there is something else hiding inside the wood that surprises even experienced burners. Freshly cut wood can hold more water than you think. Most people underestimate just how wet green wood really is. We are not talking about a little dampness here. Some species can be over 50% water by weight when freshly cut. That means if you pick up a log, nearly half of what you are holding is water. Not fuel, not heat, just water waiting to be boiled away. Now think about what happens when you throw that into a fire. Before you get any real heat, the fire has to burn energy just to push that moisture out. It is like trying to heat your house while someone keeps opening the windows. You are working, but not getting ahead. That is why wet wood hisses, smokes, and refuses to burn clean. It is not being stubborn for no reason. It is busy drying itself in the worst possible place, and once you understand that, you start to see why some fires feel like a constant struggle. And it gets worse when you realize what that extra moisture creates inside your chimney. Wet wood creates more creosote. That sticky black layer inside your chimney has a name, and it is creosote. It forms when smoke rises, cools down, and sticks to the inner walls instead of going out. Here is where wet wood causes trouble. Because it is full of moisture, it burns cooler and produces more smoke. That smoke carries unburned particles. When it hits a cooler chimney surface, it turns into that thick tar-like buildup. So every time you burn wet wood, you are not just getting less heat. You are slowly coating your chimney from the inside, bit by bit, layer by layer. And the dangerous part is how quiet it is. You do not see it happening. But over time, that buildup can ignite and cause a chimney fire. That is not a small problem. That is the kind of problem that wakes up the whole neighborhood. Different woods produce different types of smoke. Most people treat all firewood the same, but once you pay attention, you start noticing clear differences. Pine is a good example. It burns fast and hot, but it can release more resin in the smoke. That gives it a sharper smell and can leave more residue if the fire is not hot enough. Oak is almost the opposite. It burns slower, steadier, and when it is properly dried, the smoke is much cleaner. It does not rush. It just sits there doing its job like an old worker who knows exactly what he is doing. Then you have fruit woods, like apple. They smell incredible. If you have ever cooked with them, you know, but they do not always last as long in the stove, so you trade duration for aroma. It really is like choosing between different tools: fast heat, long burn, or pleasant smell. And if you mix them right, you can control how your fire behaves. But here is something strange that most people never notice until it is too late. Firewood can reabsorb moisture. Most people think once wood is dry, the job is done. Season it, stack it, forget about it. But wood does not work like that. Even after a full year of drying, it can start pulling moisture back in if you're not careful. Leave a perfectly seasoned stack in a damp place for just a week and you will notice the difference. It will not look wet, but it will not burn the same either. Slower ignition, more smoke, less heat, all because it quietly drank water again. Wood behaves like a sponge with a memory. It does not forget how to absorb moisture from the air around it. Humidity, rain, even ground moisture can work their way back in over time. That is why storage matters just as much as seasoning. You are not just drying wood once, you are protecting that dryness every single day. Ignore that, and you end up undoing months of work without even realizing it. And speaking of storage, this is where many people accidentally make things worse. Covering firewood the wrong way can ruin it. A tight tarp wrapped around the whole stack might look smart, but it does more harm than good. You trap moisture inside and block airflow. The wood cannot dry, and in some cases it actually gets wetter. You end up protecting the rain while locking in the problem. Better to cover only the top and leave the sides open. That way rain stays off, but air keeps moving through the stack. Wood needs to breathe. If you suffocate it, it fights back. Kind of like people stuck at long family dinners with no way out, but this is just the surface of how firewood behaves under pressure. Some wood pops and sparks more than others. If you've ever had a fire snap and throw tiny embers at you, you already know this one. It is not random. Certain types of wood are more likely to pop, especially softwoods. They often contain resin pockets or trapped moisture. When heat builds up inside those pockets, pressure increases until it suddenly releases. That is your pop, and those glowing sparks flying out. It is not usually dangerous if your stove or fireplace is set up properly, but it will keep you alert. I have seen sparks jump farther than a cat avoiding a bath, and that is saying something. Hardwoods tend to behave calmer, especially when fully dry, which makes them more predictable for indoor fires. And once you start thinking about how different woods behave, you naturally start asking a bigger question. Which ones actually give you the most heat? Not all firewood gives the same heat. People often assume a log is a log, but the difference in heat output can be huge. Hardwoods like oak, hickory, and ash are dense. That density means more stored energy in each piece. When they burn, they release that energy slowly and steadily. You get a longer, stronger heat. Softwoods are lighter. They catch quickly, burn fast, and disappear just as fast. That does not make them bad. It just makes them different. They are great for starting a fire or getting quick warmth when you need it. So a full load of oak can outlast and outheat a pile of pine, even if it looks smaller. That surprises a lot of people the first time they see it. Think of it like meals. Pine is breakfast, fast and useful. Oak is dinner, steady and filling. But timing matters more than most realize. And that leads to the next overlooked detail. When you burn matters. Most people focus on what wood to use, but forget when and how to use it. If you start a fire with large logs, you will usually end up waiting and wondering why nothing is happening. Big pieces take time to heat through before they release enough gas to burn properly. Start with smaller pieces instead. They catch quickly, build heat fast, and create the conditions needed for larger logs to ignite the right way. Once the fire is established, then you bring in the bigger pieces to carry that heat forward. It is a simple sequence, but it makes a big difference. Like building a team, you do not send in the heavyweight first. You build momentum, then add strength. Ignore this, and you get slow starts, more smoke, and wasted effort. And interestingly, there is something left behind after every fire that most people never question. Ash is not useless. Most people shovel it out and throw it away without a second thought. To them, it is just the leftover mess after the fire is gone, but that gray powder still has value if you know how to use it. Wood ash can help in the garden by balancing acidic soil. It can be sprinkled on icy paths for traction in winter. Some people even use it for basic cleaning because of its mild abrasive quality. Not bad for something most folks treat like garbage. Of course, there is a limit. Too much ash in the garden can do more harm than good. Use it wrong, and your plants will struggle like they are protesting your decisions. But ash is not just useful, it is also a clue. It quietly tells you how well your fire actually burned, and most people never pay attention to that. The color of ash reveals burn quality. Most people scoop ash out without even looking at it, but it actually tells you a lot about what just happened in your stove. Light gray or almost white ash is a good sign. It means the fire burned hot and clean using most of the available fuel. Now look at dark, chunky ash. That usually means incomplete combustion. The fire did not reach a high enough temperature or did not get enough air. Some of the wood never fully burned, so you are left with heavier, darker remains. In simple terms, your fire did not finish its job. It is like washing dishes and leaving grease behind. Looks done at first glance, but not really. Once you start noticing ash color, you get feedback without needing any tools. And speaking of things not finishing properly, there is another issue hiding in plain sight. Bigger logs do not always burn fully. It seems logical that a large log should give you a long, complete burn, but that only happens if the conditions are right. When airflow is limited or the fire never gets hot enough, those big pieces struggle. The outside burns, but the inside stays untouched longer than it should. What you're left with is a half-burned chunk that looks like charcoal. Many people see that and think the fire failed. In reality, it is just unfinished fuel waiting for another round. If you know what you're doing, you can toss those pieces back in later and get more heat out of them. Nothing truly goes to waste in a well-managed fire. Ignore it, and you are throwing away good fuel without realizing it. But once you start reusing those pieces, you uncover another strange detail most people overlook. Charcoal from your firewood is valuable. Those black chunks? That's basically homemade charcoal. It burns hotter and cleaner than raw wood. You can save it, use it later, or even cook with it. Free upgrade, just sitting in your stove. But here's something that confuses a lot of people. Not all cracks mean dry wood. You've probably seen logs with big cracks on the ends. That's a good sign, but not a guarantee. Surface dries first. Inside can still be wet. So a cracked log can still hiss like it's telling secrets. Always check more than just looks. And that leads to a tool many people skip. Moisture meters are underrated. They are one of the simplest tools you can own, yet many people ignore them. A basic meter costs little, takes seconds to use, and gives you a clear answer. You press it into a freshly split log and it tells you exactly how much moisture is inside. No guessing, no relying on feel or appearance. I avoided using one for years, thinking I could judge wood by experience alone. Then I finally tried it and realized how often I had been wrong. It would have saved me a lot of weak fires and wasted wood. Still, even the best tool has limits, and that leads to something more important. Experience still beats gadgets. You can learn a lot from sound, smell, and how the fire behaves. Wood that burns clean sounds different, smells different, feels different. After a while, you don't need tools. You just know, like knowing when coffee is too weak without even tasting it. And yes, that's a real skill. But here's something that surprises even seasoned burners. Cold weather changes how wood burns. In extreme cold, draft improves. Fires burn stronger. In mild weather, draft can be weaker. Fires feel sluggish. Same wood, different performance. It's like trying to run in winter air versus a humid summer day. One feels sharp, the other feels sticky. And then there's something people rarely think about. Altitude affects fire behavior. Higher altitude means less oxygen. Less oxygen means slower combustion. So the same fire setup behaves differently depending on where you are. Not a big deal for most, but if you've ever moved locations and thought your fire changed, this might be why. And now for something a bit counterintuitive. Splitting wood speeds up drying more than time alone. A whole log can sit for months and still stay wet deep inside. From the outside, it might look ready, but the core holds onto moisture like it is in no hurry. That is where many people get fooled. Time alone does not guarantee dry firewood. When you split a log, you expose the inner wood directly to air. Now moisture has a clear path out instead of being trapped inside. Drying speeds up fast, sometimes cutting months off the process. It is like opening a window in a stuffy room. Suddenly everything starts to breathe and change. Ignore splitting and you wait longer for worse results. But once you start splitting properly, you notice another detail that most people completely overlook. Size matters more than species sometimes. A small piece of average wood can outperform a large chunk of premium wood because it dries better, burns better. People obsess over species but ignore size. That's like buying expensive shoes that don't fit. Looks good, works terrible. But here's something almost nobody notices. Firewood smells different depending on moisture. Dry wood has a faint, clean smell. Wet wood smells heavier, almost sour sometimes. It's subtle, but once you notice it, it's obvious. Your nose becomes another tool, and no batteries required. Now let's talk about a mistake that quietly ruins efficiency. Overloading the stove kills performance. More wood does not mean more heat. Too much wood chokes airflow and lowers temperature. You get a smoky, lazy fire instead of a strong one. It's like putting too many people in a small car. Nobody's comfortable and nothing runs well. Better to feed the fire steadily than dump everything in at once. And this connects to something even more subtle. The way you place logs matters. Most people toss wood into the stove without thinking, but placement changes everything. When logs are stacked parallel, the fire burns slower because airflow is more restricted. Heat builds gradually, and the burn lasts longer. Now switch to a crisscross pattern, and the story changes. Air can move freely between the gaps. The fire gets more oxygen, burns hotter, and moves faster through the wood. Same fuel, completely different behavior. You can fine-tune your fire just by adjusting how you lay the logs. No tools, no extra effort, just a bit of intention. It really is like playing chess, only instead of pieces, you are moving heat and air around. And once you start controlling that, you realize there is a simple habit that can actually save you money. Older firewood is not always better. A lot of people think the longer wood sits, the better it gets. Up to a point, that is true, but leave it too long, especially in poor conditions, and it starts to break down. The fibers weaken, the structure softens, and the wood becomes what many call punky. Punky wood burns fast and light. It loses that dense energy you want from a good log. You end up feeding the fire more often and getting less heat in return. So yes, seasoning is important, but there is a window where wood is at its best. Miss that window and quality drops. It is like bread. Fresh is great. Leave it too long and it dries out and loses its value. Timing matters more than people think. And in the end, all of this leads to one mistake that quietly wastes more firewood than anything else. The biggest waste of firewood is impatience. Burning wood too early, not letting it dry, not stacking it right. All those small mistakes add up. You end up using more wood for less heat. It's not one big mistake. It's a bunch of small ones working together. Fix those, and suddenly your woodpile lasts longer, your fires burn cleaner, and your house stays warmer with less effort. Which, if you ask me, is the whole point. If you found even one of these facts useful, take a look at the other videos on this channel. We cover how to heat your home with less wood, how to store firewood outside the right way, which wood types to burn and which to avoid, and the common mistakes that waste more fuel than people realize. And if you want more practical tips like this, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.